The sound of heavy gunfire echoed through the valley. Soldiers ducked for cover, hearts pounding. In the chaos, one young woman crouched low, clutching a box of ammunition far heavier than she was. She wasn't a trained sniper. She wasn't even supposed to fire a weapon. But in the next 10 seconds, when she lifted that rifle to her shoulder, her single shot would decide whether 200 men lived or died. The smell of dust and smoke filled the air long before the battle reached its peak. For hours, the rumble of artillery had been building like a storm in the distance, each explosion closer than the last. Soldiers crouched in trenches, rifles clutched tight, waiting for the next wave. And in the middle of it all, moving between men twice her size, was a young woman whose job wasn't to fight, but to carry. Her name wasn't on any list of official fighters. She wasn't trained for the trigger, the recoil, or the killing silence that follows a shot. Her assignment was simple yet vital: deliver ammunition. Again and again, she bent her back beneath the weight of heavy boxes, her arms trembling as she hauled the very lifeline of the unit. Without her, the men would be firing blanks within minutes. With her, they had a chance to hold the line. At first glance, she looked almost out of place. Her uniform wasn't polished. Her boots were worn and caked with mud. Strands of hair stuck to her forehead, damp from sweat. But her eyes, sharp, unyielding, revealed a different story. Fear was there, yes, but so was determination. She wasn't just running supplies. She was proving, step by step, that courage didn't always come with stripes on a sleeve or medals on a chest. Every trip across that battlefield was a gamble. The crack of rifles split the air. Bullets slapped the dirt around her boots, sending sharp bursts of soil flying up. She ducked low but never dropped her load. Soldiers called out her name, urging her to move faster, to keep low, to survive. She didn't answer. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, and her only focus was to deliver the box clutched in her arms to the next position. And yet, with each delivery, the reality grew clearer. They were running out of options. The enemy was pressing harder, their fire sharper, their advance more determined. The defenders were being pushed back. Even with the ammunition she carried, the line was bending. If it broke, 200 lives would be swallowed in an instant. It wasn't supposed to come down to her. She wasn't supposed to be the one faced with the decision that loomed ahead. But war rarely waits for permission. It takes ordinary people and drags them into moments that define history. And as the shouting grew louder, as the men beside her braced for what looked like the end, she felt something shift inside her. A realization that she couldn't just carry survival in a box. Sometimes you have to hold it in your hands. The line was crumbling. Shouts overlapped with gunfire, each soldier trying to cover the other while scrambling for cover. Dirt and smoke turned the air into a choking haze. From her spot behind a shattered wall, the young woman saw the truth the men around her didn't want to admit. They were seconds away from being overrun. Her chest heaved as she dropped the last box of ammunition at the feet of a soldier. His hands shook as he tried to reload, sweat cutting paths down his dust-covered face. "We can't hold them," he muttered under his breath. The words were meant for no one, but they stabbed her heart like a blade. She looked ahead. Through the haze, she caught sight of the enemy force closing in. And at the front, a figure with a scoped rifle, steady, unshaken, advancing with calm precision. In that instant, she understood. This man wasn't just another soldier. He was the one orchestrating the chaos, signaling the advance. Every time he raised his arm, the enemy surged forward with perfect coordination. He was the thread holding their assault together. Her eyes dropped to the rifle lying beside a fallen comrade. The weapon's barrel gleamed faintly in the dusty light. Her stomach tightened. She had never fired in combat. The kick of a rifle was something she'd only seen others endure, the sound something she carried boxes toward, not away from. But survival is rarely polite enough to wait for experience. Her hands moved before her mind could argue. She crawled to the rifle, fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the stock. It was heavier than she imagined, its cold metal biting into her palms. Around her, the battle seemed to slow, each sound stretching into echoes. The hiss of bullets, the labored breaths of men, the distant scream of artillery. She pressed her body flat against the rubble, lifted the weapon to her shoulder, and tried to steady her aim. The world narrowed to a single line, the scope circling over the figure in the distance. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would shake the rifle itself. Sweat blurred her vision, but she blinked it clear. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the means of survival. She was the means. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Doubt clawed at her. What if I miss? What if I make things worse? But then she thought of the faces around her. Men exhausted, terrified, yet still fighting because they had no choice. 200 lives balanced on the edge of that scope. She exhaled slowly, just as she had seen others do. The sights aligned. The figure lifted his arm for another advance. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked back into her shoulder with violent force. For an instant, the recoil almost knocked her flat. But through the scope, she saw it. The figure staggered, then collapsed. The advancing line faltered, confusion rippling through the enemy ranks. Around her, silence fell for half a heartbeat. Then came the realization they weren't overrun. They still had a chance. And it was because of her. For a moment no one moved. The men around her blinked in disbelief, their ears still ringing from the shot. Then, slowly, the truth spread like fire through dry grass. The enemy's advance had stopped. The commanding figure lay motionless in the dust. And with him, the rhythm of the assault had collapsed. The attackers, once coordinated and confident, hesitated. Some faltered mid-step, others ducked for cover, unsure who had just fallen. Confusion spread through their lines, and hesitation soon turned into retreat. Gunfire from her side grew louder, sharper, fueled not only by bullets but by a renewed sense of hope. The defenders, whose seconds earlier had braced for death, were now pushing back. The young woman lowered the rifle, her arms trembling so violently she could barely hold it. Her chest heaved with each breath, and for the first time she realized what she had done. Her shot had not just pierced a single target, it had shifted the tide of an entire battle. Soldiers turned toward her, their expressions a mix of shock and gratitude. One man, his helmet hanging loose on his head, shouted, "You saved us!" Another slapped her on the back, his grin wide despite the grime on his face. In their eyes, she was no longer just the girl who carried ammunition. She was the reason they were alive. But she didn't smile. Her hand still shook as she stared at the rifle, its weight now heavier than any box of ammo she had ever carried. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't sought glory or recognition. Yet war had forced her into a moment where there was no other choice, and she had answered. Word of her actions spread quickly. By nightfall, the story was whispered through the ranks. How one shot, fired by someone who wasn't even supposed to fight, had saved 200 lives. In the days that followed, it became more than a tale of survival. It was a symbol, a reminder that courage doesn't always come from those expected to lead. Sometimes it emerges from the unlikeliest of places. Years later, when the war was over and the guns had gone silent, veterans who had been there would still speak of that moment. They would tell their children and grandchildren about the day hope returned in the form of a single shot. Some would recall the chaos before it, others the stunned silence after. But all agreed on one thing. Without her, they wouldn't have made it home. For the young woman herself, the memory remained etched deeper than any scar. She never sought medals or parades. She carried the moment quietly, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. Yet whether she admitted it or not, her action had become part of history. A story of how one untrained, ordinary person had risen above fear to save hundreds. And it all began with a box of ammunition, carried across a battlefield.